The two that we're calling out here is the M700, which is making getting other sniper rifles just not fun, since it's so vastly outperforming all of the other ones. So that is getting a damage reduction.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
What's up, you guys? Gone Wrong Zone here. So, the very first round of nerfs have just come out for the live game. They were announced in the state of the game a mere 24 hours ago, and with just a mere 12 more hours to the title basin and a whole new WT5 coming out, I just thought I'd do a little piece on what I feel the nerfs mean for the overall game. Obviously, these are just all my own opinion and predictions, and nothing is set in stone. But I still think there are some points of importance that I would like to share with you guys, especially towards the very end, so make sure you guys watch till then. Now, several nerfs went out, notable ones being nerfs to the Model 700 marksman rifle, the MK17 rifle, and some nerfs to critical hit damage. Now, regardless of what these nerfs are and whether or not they're justified is another matter entirely, which I will speak on later. But the main issue with all these nerfs that I have observed over the past few hours since the release of the state of the game is this. And this is not unique to a game like The Division 2, this applies to all games. Nerfs don't feel good. It doesn't matter whether the nerf is justified or not, it doesn't feel good. It riles up your player base and it causes them to feel very unhappy. Now, this situation is made even worse by two ongoing factors in The Division 2. The first factor is this, is that the PvE game, the NPCs in the PvE game currently feel very spongy. Most average players are already having difficulty handling the hardest forms of content, such as a level 4 control point. By nerfing the player's ability to dish out damage, this only exacerbates the problem even further. So the problem to the nerfs isn't exactly the nerf itself, but what the nerf affects. Let me showcase this point in a very specific nerf that was announced just yesterday in the state of the game, and that is the nerf to the MK17. The problem with this nerf isn't that the player base isn't unaware that this rifle is way more powerful than all the other rifles of its class. No, we understand that. The problem with this nerf is that all other rifles in this category have been deemed as unviable for the endgame. What Massive should have done, ideally, is buff all the other rifles up instead. And while theoretically, this is a very daunting task for the development team, this is the ideal solution. People are not upset over the fact that the rifle was too powerful. They're upset over the fact that it's the only viable option right now for someone to progress properly through the endgame against waves and waves of yellows and purples. An entire post has just blown up on Reddit, and I'm looking at it right now. In 11 hours, it's gotten almost 3,000 upvotes and a gold award. The TLDR of this entire post is, as the author has written down here, I'm loving the Division 2. The rifle class is a major part, and this applies to myself too, if not the major part of what I love about it. The MK17 is just good enough. It's overused because the rest of the rifle class is too weak, not because it's too strong. And it's exactly what I just said and what I experienced in my own gameplay. Using any other rifle causes you to hit like a wet noodle. And that's only comparing the rifle to other rifles. When comparing it to other similar gun types such as the assault rifle, glaring problems start to emerge. The rifle is just going to fall really far behind due to these nerfs. Again, this is a little premature, but the main point that I want to state is this. The player base and people as a whole, myself included, will get upset over nerfs because nerfs don't feel good. And again, this is a thing that many companies do because it's easier to nerf one thing than to buff 20 other things up to its level. And that is acceptable if the specific entity at hand that we are talking about is overpowered in nature. But in this instance, it was not overpowered. It felt good, it felt balanced, it felt like what endgame content was supposed to feel like. It rewarded skill. If you got a headshot in with this gun, it downed the enemies quickly. But it was still not an automatic weapon. If you got swarmed while using it, you are still gonna go down as the sharpshooter specialization. And that is the crux of what has got many people upset. Massive should instead be looking at the game in an overall sense and thinking, okay, what can we do to make the player experience better? Instead of thinking, what can we do to bring the guns more in line with one another? And while these things do often go hand in hand, sometimes they don't, as in this specific situation. I always believe it's better for the developers to take their time to buff something, spend time developing all the different assets that need to be buffed, and buff everything together at the same time. Take the entire situation about skills for that matter, right? The whole thing that's been happening about skills and how skills were unviable since the beginning of the game till today. It took them 3 weeks. 3 weeks to buff skills in this new Tidal Basin World Tier 5 update. And the player base wasn't necessarily okay with that, but they weren't outraged over that. They weren't upset over that because it wasn't enough. It didn't feel like you were taking something away from them. It was a buff. And even though these buffs took a while to come, the promise of the buffs were there, and that's what kept people satisfied. In the same light, it's a lot better to buff all the weapons and buff the mobs accordingly rather than to just nerf the weapons. It doesn't feel good. 3 weeks into the game and we're already seeing nerfs. I truly hope that Massive doesn't make this a norm and instead chooses to buff things over the long term than to nerf things over the short term. And that leads me to my second but very big point. I hope, to the bottom of my heart, I really hope that they didn't make this decision because of what's been happening in the PvP realm. I seriously hope that this isn't the case, and I think a lot of us would be very upset if it was so. Just to give a bit of context, there have been numerous builds running around of this one-shot sniper build, and that is what many people are speculating probably led to the nerfs to the Model 700. As it stands right now, I don't feel like the Model 700 needed a nerf. While I've used it in my own sharpshooter guides extensively and it is my favorite weapon, it has a lot of drawbacks. It has an extremely long reload time, making it extremely impractical. I can only use it when enemies are at a moderate or long range away, and most of the time I'll have to use my rifle. Other models of the marksman rifle don't do as much damage as this marksman rifle, but they have other attributes that bring it up. They have longer optimal ranges, allowing me to use a marksman rifle like the hunting M44 in group play, where I'm sitting really far behind and popping off headshots. In group play too, when you have a high uptime on the enemy because your friends are distracting their fire, you need to churn out bullets at a fast rate, and the hunting M44 reloads way faster than the Model 700. So taking these factors into account, I really felt like the different types of marksman rifles currently promoted a diversity of playstyle. Some people have left comments on my video guides and on my Reddit posts about using different kinds of marksman rifles that suited their playstyle, like the so-called marksman rifle. And this is great. I really like it when I see and I read things like this because it means that there's a diversity of builds and there's a healthy amount of different options for you to choose from. So it leads me to suspect, like what many other people are suspecting right now, did these nerfs come about because of what is happening in the PvP realm? And I really hope this isn't the case. From all my experience in playing years of games, from MMOs to action games to other types of looter games, you cannot, it's an impossibility to try to balance PvP and PvE together. Either PvE and PvP have to be instanced differently and or they're totally different entities altogether. In any game, it's always been a priority being placed on one or the other. And in The Division 1, the developers already made the mistakes of prioritizing PvP over PvE, leading to a massive dropout of players. As much as I appreciate and respect our hardcore PvP players out there, PvE is what's going to make this game survive. PvE is going to be what's going to make this game thrive. And PvE is what the majority of the player base is currently indulging in. In fact, no one's even complaining about the lackluster Dark Zone anymore because of how great they've done the PvE areas. So at this point, I'm already reiterating what many players want and desire for the game. Please don't make this a game that's balanced around PvP. Please don't. PvP in a game like this is a big hunking mess. There will always be a new FOTM build that someone comes up with to one-shot somebody, or there will be a new FOTM build that someone comes up with to solo an entire team of 4 other agents. And if we let these problems flood over into the PvE realm, without mincing my words here, it's gonna be an utter fucking mess. So, all that said and done, what are the lessons learned from all of this? We know that the developers will and have proven from this very first nerf in the live stage of the game that they're willing to implement nerfs as they see fit. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, the way that we can adapt to that is this. Make sure you keep all your gear. And I know this is a bit of a high task to ask because our stash space is already so limited, but at this point, I myself am pretty thankful that I kept a lot of the different types of rifles and marksman rifles, as I'll have something viable to use tomorrow as I enter into Tidal Basin and World Tier 5. Keep some alternatives on hand so that you can whip them out when the inevitable nerfs and buffs do come in. TLDR, nerfs don't feel good. They never will, they never have. I believe it'll be a lot healthier for the game if the developers can find a way to be able to buff things instead of nerf things. And while that is a monumental task to us as compared to nerfing one specific item, I think it'll be worth it in the long run. And as always, this is a PvE game. You can always buff the health of the NPCs if you buff the weapons by too much. So, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my other video guides on the sharpshooter specialization. You may just find something in there that might be helpful to you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in DC.